Regearing the TJ front and rear to 410 gears from Yukon. Having a clear area to lay out the gears, bearings, and shims is critical. Gear teeth should be inspected for any damage prior to installation. I like to also clean the gears with carb or brake cleaner to get any oil or dirt off from manufacturing. The other important step to remember is to measure all the shims provided in the rebuild kit and write down each thickness using a Sharpie. Chock the front wheels, set the rear on a couple of jack stands, and remove the rear wheels. You're going to have to partially slide the axles out to free up the differential carrier. Place an oil pan under the differential housing for draining the diff oil. Use a 1/2 inch socket to remove the diff cover fasteners. Leave the top fastener loosely in to help support the diff cover while you remove the rest of the fasteners. Behold, the carrier in all its glory. I highly recommend using these reusable gaskets from Lube. They work great. No messy silicone. No leaks. Use carb or brake cleaner to flush out all oil and grit from the differential housing. Rotate the diff carrier to allow access to the pinion shaft and pinion shaft lock screw. Next, we want to remove the bearing cap bolts, but before doing this, note which bearing cap goes to which side and also note the orientation. It is important these caps go back in the same location and orientation. Look for stamped letters marked on the diff housing and bearings caps to help identify proper location. You can see H's marked on mine. Use a rubber mallet to gently knock the bearing cap loose. You should be able to wiggle them off once loose. Again, take note of which side each one comes off of. Take special care not to damage the inner machine surfaces. Here's another close-up of the bearing cap, or better yet, another attempt to show the stamped letter H on the bearing cap. I have a PowerTrax grip lock mechanical locker for 30 spline axles in my setup. I had swapped out my stock 27 spline axles for a little beefier 30 spline axle set from 10 factory. So my next step here is to loosen and remove the pinion shaft lock screw, which will allow me to remove the pinion shaft. Remove the brake drums to allow the axles to slide out a few inches, freeing the differential carrier. Notice I am able to push the axle in at this point. This allows for the C-clip to be removed on the differential side, freeing up the axle to be pulled out as mentioned earlier. Next, we remove the brake drum from the other side and push the axle in towards the differential. With the pinion shaft removed from the differential carrier and both axles pushed in, we now have access to the C-clips which need to be removed. Use a magnet to pull out the C-clips. It's kinda scary to think the only thing holding your Dana 35 axle in are these C-clips. Yes, I'm having a bit of trouble trying to record with one hand and guide a magnet through an opening without it sticking to the sides of the carrier. Becoming a real pain now. I can now push the axles out, even being able to just use a finger to do so. I pull the axle out a few more inches to ensure it has cleared the differential carrier. Repeat on the other side. Next, begin removing the rear axle yoke bolts. Zip tie the drive shaft to the undercarriage somewhere, since we're going to detach the drive shaft from the diff. The parking brake bracket seems to be a sturdy location. I swapped out both front and rear drive shafts with a CV set from Oliver's Driveshaft. I also installed an SYE kit on the transfer case. Once all U-joint straps are removed, firmly press the drive shaft in towards transfer case to release the U-joint from the pinion shaft yoke. You might need to use a small pry bar to help convince the U-joint to pop out. Make sure the U-joint bearing cases don't fall off. Once U-joint is freed from the yoke, it's a good idea to wrap some tape around the U-joint bearing caps to keep them from falling off. Also notice, with zip ties, I am able to completely move the drive shaft out of the way. Next, I remove the driver's side bearing cap. I left this unintentionally until I was ready to remove the diff carrier. Again, note which side the bearing cap is coming off of and its orientation. Next, I remove the pinion shaft nut. This nut will not be reused. They are designed to deform during installation. As a side note, this DeWalt impact wrench with its 1,200 foot-pounds of breakaway torque makes removing and installing these pinion shaft nuts easy. Now slide the yoke off of the pinion shaft. Since I'm replacing the ring and pinion gear, I'm not concerned about damaging the pinion gear. I'm using a mallet to knock the pinion gear out of the differential housing.
GoPro, stop recording.
Here, I'm pressing the inner bearing onto the pinion gear shaft using a 20-ton shop press. I applied some gear oil on the shaft for lubrication to help with the installation. I'm using old bearing cap as support. By the way, notice my 3D printed knob for the shop press release valve. Way more efficient than constantly using the press handle to release the valve. Next, I need to remove the old ring gear from the diff carrier. I'm using a rubber mallet to see if I can lodge it loose, then reinstalling a few bolts to just hammer the ring gear off of the carrier. Finally, getting the big effing hammer to knock the ring gear loose. Again, I won't be reusing these bolts or the ring gear, so I don't really care if I damage either. I should also point out that ring gear bolts should never be reused once they have been torqued down. Next, I'm installing the new ring gear onto the locker. To help with the installation, I put the ring gear in the oven for about an hour, which causes the ring gear to expand, making it easier to slip onto the locker. It is still hot at this point, hence the need for gloves. It's critical to have all fasteners easily thread into the ring gear. If there is any resistance, I readjust the ring gear and try again. Notice at this point, all fasteners go in real easy by hand. Once I'm certain all holes are aligned and the fasteners go in with ease, I apply some red Loctite to the threads of the fasteners. I now use a rubber mallet to gently help seat the ring gear onto the locker. Next, I drive the fasteners down, further seating the ring gear in place. Now I torque the ring gear bolts to a final torque of 80 foot-pounds. I first torque all fasteners to 50% at 40 foot-pounds in a star crisscross pattern. Then I go back and torque to their final torque value of 80 foot-pounds, again torquing the fasteners in a star crisscross pattern. A little tip for you guys. Bolt one of your axles to your tire and use the axle splines to hold the carrier or locker as you torque the fasteners down, as I'm showing here. Works better than installing it in a vise, in my opinion. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of footage showing setup and installation, but what I'm showing here is my final backlash of around 8 thou. Thanks for watching. I'll do a better job of not deleting footage next time.